it.
And we're not going to stop it. Of course we're not going to stop it. Ash Hanley finishes it off.
Jack Bird with his first Leeds try.
Welcome back to Matchday Live, everybody. A pleasure to have your company as we are building up to yet another Leeds Rhinos Men's Super League clash. We're with you before every game, so don't forget to tune in wherever you're watching, whether you're on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram or Facebook. It's a pleasure to have your company. My name's Dan Hawkhead. I'm pleased as always to be joined by BBC Radio Leeds' Jack Conlon as the Rhinos prepare to take on Toulouse Olympique. Sadly, we are not in the south of France this week. It'd been a pleasure to be out there reporting to you from the sidelines. Instead, we are here at AMT Headingley, still getting you prepared and bringing you all the pre-match notes. Jack, a big win. Let's go back a little time. Let's go back to last week and a big win over St Helens. You talked about the Rhinos have to win these big games, like Warrington, like St Helens, in order to be competitive this year. How did last week just set us out for what should be a great clash today as well?
Well, it was an interesting watch, I think, wasn't it, that game against St Helens? We were talking just before we started recording, actually, that there were points at which the quality perhaps wasn't there, and that's from both teams. You know, it felt like a game where there was plenty of knock-ons, you know, some poor penalties given away as well, but as a contest, it was fantastic to watch. You know, as a spectacle, it was so entertaining. You know, the Rhinos obviously falling behind going into half-time. That late Tristan Saylor try just perhaps making it a bit more nervy for three sides of Headingley, certainly.
Definitely for me as well.
Well, exactly. But the way they played in the second half was fantastic. You know, to come out in the way they did. You know, backs against the wall at times, and I think you look at a couple of moments in that second half. You know, games like that tend to be defined by big moments and not necessarily tries. I mean, Jake Connors. Well, it wasn't a 40-20 in the end, was it? It ended up being batted back by Kyle Felt for a goal line dropout, but that booming kick when, you know, the Rhinos had spent that set trying to get out of their own 20, out of their own 30. You know, he comes up with that last tackle play, and that seems to just flip the game on its head. And then a bit further on in that second half as well, Ryan Hall's tackle on Jack Welsby on the back of a Saints break when I think Welsby had a good 3 or 4 plays to his left-hand side with acres of space, and Hall comes up with that tackle. You know, that again is such an important defensive play, especially when you look back at it and in the context of that game. So yeah, I think they did really well to come out on the right side of that. I think Saints weren't at their best second half, especially compared to the first, but at the same time, you know, you can only play what's in front of you, and you know, Leeds did just enough and did what they needed to come away with 2 really important competition points and, you know, keep themselves at the top of the table, put 2 points between themselves and St Helens, of course, as well. And you know, I think now as we sort of approach the halfway point of Super League, which I think I'm right in saying this weekend, yes, will take us over halfway.
It's gone quick.
It has gone super quick. You know, it didn't seem 2 minutes since we were starting back in February. So, yeah, you know, you look at that sort of top 6, top 7 picture, it is starting to get really tight, and if Leeds can just keep a bit of distance between themselves and some of that chasing pack, then I think they'll be all the better for it come sort of late August, September time.
Of course, there's the Rhinos and Warrington that are currently occupying those top 2 spots, and Helens just slightly behind. But when you look at how the Rhinos have performed in recent weeks, it's all been a culmination of, you know, getting the results over the line. Yes, we can win big like we can against Huddersfield, but we're now showing that we can win those tight contests and hopefully can get a win out in the south of France for the first time ever in Super League against Toulouse today. It all bodes well for not peaking at the right time. You want to be peaking when it's rounds 25, 26, 27, but to be doing it right now and being the one with the target on the back, that's not something that actually I think is or doesn't suit Brad Arthur's side at the minute. I think they like it.
I think so as well. I think they've passed a few tests, this season. Warrington and St Helens being a key one. I mean, again, they'll get that test next week when they play Warrington next Thursday. Again, that's another big game to look forward to. Obviously, Toulouse coming first, but I still think there are things there to do, and there are things for this side to prove to themselves. I think Wigan being the big task. I mean, that game at the Brick a few weeks back was probably one of the Rhinos' worst performances of the season. As an onlooker, I mean, Hull FC, I think for me is definitely still top of that list. They were really poor that afternoon. I think everyone would admit that. But yeah, I think that Wigan game was just one sort of sign that perhaps there is still a bit of work to do for this Rhinos side to properly stamp themselves as the best in the division or one of the best in the division. But everything sort of next to that and everything leading up to that and building into those sorts of games, they have got right, I think. And that St Helens game, again, is another big tick in the box, I think. To beat a team that are up and in and around that area, does you, as we said, a world of good. But I still think there are a couple of tests yet to pass. Wigan probably being the big one, given how they've been trending, particularly in this last month to 6 weeks.
Absolutely. Well, you're saying about work being done. The work is definitely being done off the field by Ian Blease. Two massive announcements over the last sort of 4 days in Brad Arthur signing his new contract. He's here for the next 2 years. And George Brown's sticking around as well. And he will look to be, and Brad Arthur said it in press on Wednesday, George Brown looks to be the man to take Leeds forward into this new era when Brodie Croft does unfortunately leave the club. But just your thoughts quickly on both Brad and then George as well. Are you excited by those announcements?
I think everyone is in Super League. There were two really big deals when they sort of emerged at the end of last week and at the start of this week. I mean, Brad Arthur obviously being the big one of the two. It was quite a surprise, I think, to everyone. Certainly the timing of it on Friday morning when that news dropped seemingly caught everyone by surprise because, just, 12 hours earlier, he'd been asked by the press in his press conference after the Saints game, we're into June now, how close are you to making that call? And he'd said the 30th of June, a bit further down the track. He'd said it was the last question he was asked in that press conference. And, so to wake up or to see that news the following morning, I think stunned a few people. But I think it's great news for the Rhinos. It gives them that bit of stability for 2 years. I guess for Brad Arthur as well, it puts an end certainly for a good chunk of time to the eternal question at almost every press conference when he has been on these rolling deals asked to, have you made your mind up yet? So he won't have that now for a fair old chunk of time. But to commit for 2 years is a real show that, he's enjoying himself here. He's very much invested in the project. I don't think that was ever in doubt anyway, but this is even more of a sign that is the case. So, I think that's a really, really important bit of business from Ian Blease and for the Rhinos, to tie him down for those 2 years.
He didn't want to say as well that it was a rebuild on the podcast. He did say it's not a rebuild, but for him as well, when he said about it being a project, it is really a project looking at what the squad is going to look like next. It's going to be a totally different looking squad. Well,
I thought that was a really interesting line as well from his press conference this week, was that I think he said something along the lines of people will be really surprised actually when they see our squad next season. And I wondered what that was sort of alluding to. He talked a lot as well about getting the balance right between the recruitment and signing players and also giving youth a chance. And I think that leads us perfectly into George Brown as a conversation. Again, a relatively long commitment made by him and by the rugby club to him. They see him clearly as a long-term six, as one of their long-term options. Again, he was a player that Brad Arthur talked about this week in his presser and said that, he's going to give him every chance to have that number 6 on his back next season. Now, we'll wait and see what happens in that regard and how his recovery sort of comes on this season from that injury, whether or not he can string some games together towards the back end of the season. I think that'd do him really good going into 2027. But as a statement from Brad Arthur, that's quite a big one to back George Brown, someone who they clearly think a lot about, clearly think highly of. He's always impressed at reserves and academy level, and has looked all right in the couple of Super League games as well that he's played. So I thought that was a really, really good admission. And I think ultimately it's been a week of good news for Leeds on the Brad Arthur front. on the George Brown front, and just back on Brad Arthur. I think that long-term commitment also helps when it comes to that recruitment. Certainly for 2027, where we said it's not a rebuild, but at the same time, I think you have got to appreciate the fact that they are losing a good 5 or 6 big players, first-team players from that squad. So as much as they might not have to rebuild the squad when it comes to signings, there is going to have to be a fair bit of change there, and players stepping up, players stepping into roles that are going to be vacated. So I think it helps with that as well, because when it does come to signing players, there is clearly a project there, and there is clearly a bit of stability about Leeds. That players that are going to come into the club for next season know that they're going to have the same coach, or should have the same coach for the next 2 years. So yeah, it's been a week of good news, I think you can say, for the Rhinos.
And hopefully a week that ends with a win tonight against Toulouse Olympique, themselves languishing down the bottom end of the table, but looking to string together back-to-back wins for the first time since the opening weekends of the season, as off the back of that great win against Huddersfield last time. I absolutely ripped them apart at the Flair Stadium. Jack, you were there reporting for BBC Radio Leeds. Just what does that Toulouse side look like this year? Because, yeah, they're one of the newly promoted sides, but they look, despite results not going their way and building them up the league table, actually they look a better project than what came into the league back in 2022 when they got first promoted.
They certainly do. I think they've got the benefit as well of having some of the newly promoted sides to play against, and not being the only one, not being the one that everyone sort of targets in that regard. Albeit their wins this season have come against sides that were already Super League clubs anyway, so that probably shoots down that argument straight away. But yeah, I can't say I've seen loads of them. I've seen snippets of a lot of their games, but yeah, I was there at the Flair Stadium at the weekend. Now Huddersfield are poor. There's no getting away from that. They were poor, but at the same time, Toulouse looked really threatening. And mainly from close range when they were on the Huddersfield line, but the way they built out throughout the game was really impressive, I thought. Ollie Ashelbot was really key to what they do now. He's not in their squad this week, which I think is a massive
huge
miss. The fact that he's
really
not in their 21, so he won't play against the Rhinos, and I think that's a huge miss for Toulouse, because he does so much. Does Ashelbot? I don't think you can really underestimate the impact he has on that side and the work that he does. Yes, he has the flashy moments where he makes the breaks and he's got that electric pace, but a lot of the hard work he does in the grind as well is really noticeable, actually, when you watch Toulouse, in that he will happily take 1 or 2 carries during a yardage set just to try and keep them moving forward. And what he does as well is he runs onto the ball, which sounds like a really basic thing to say, but when he runs onto the ball at the pace he does and just arrows straight at a defensive line, who, especially in moments where they're tiring, it's an easy 10 metres forward for Toulouse, and that was really noticeable against Huddersfield at the weekend, is the amount of times he would just take those yardage runs. It's sort of like almost under 10s, under 11s stuff, and I don't mean that in I mean that in the best way possible. That's not an insult, but it is just such an effective tactic to have your quickest player just take carries straight off the ruck, coming onto the ball at pace, and just eating up that easy yardage, and that's what he did really well for them at the weekend. That was really effective.
Very much like a Lockie Miller, I'd say, in that aspect.
Yeah, I don't think there's many fullbacks that really do it, probably in Super League, but I think, funnily enough, Ashelbot and Miller are two that do, neither of which are playing this weekend, of course, for the Rhinos. So, yeah, he's a massive miss for them. But I just thought they looked really slick, and there was an intensity about them, particularly near the Huddersfield line. We'll come on to some of their key players very shortly, but Jake Shorrocks, everything seemed to go through him. They've had a bit of an interchange in halves partnership this season. There's been 3 players that have almost rotated in that spot, but Shorrocks for me looked really good at the weekend. As I said, a lot went through him when it came to their attack. They really like throwing different angles at a defence. Players coming, back against the grain on drop-off plays or on short balls. They did a lot of that against Huddersfield. So, whether that was just a one-off tactic against the Giants, we'll wait and see. But yeah, I think that as much as their record, particularly in the last three or so months, doesn't look particularly pretty. Before that Giants game, they'd won 1 in 10. There is a team there, and there is an attacking team there, and if they do have that confidence about them, they can be a threat.
It's ironic, actually, because they're one of the top teams for tackle breaks, one of the top teams for tackles. So they're finding room to make breaks, but they're also having to do a lot of defensive work. The set completion is the worst in the league at 75%, which I think.
Does that point to a team that are throwing caution to the wind too much? Is the question there? Then are they trying too much and that's not really coming off? Whereas other teams are perhaps playing the basics better. Is that what they're doing wrong? Perhaps. Certainly, I think when you look at them as an attacking side, an attacking entity, they do like to move the ball a lot. So maybe that is the reason for that. And
that's a great way to segue into talking about Jake Shorrocks, because he's one of those players now. He's been at Toulouse a few years now, seems to have really cemented his place in Sylvain Hulez's halfback partnership. What that looks like, it's been a bit different this year to previous years. But in terms of their promotion campaign, he kicked all 5 goals in that grand final win. Remarkable, really, that he was the sole point scorer with the boot against York to get them promoted. But what's his influence been like this year? You've touched on it a little bit, but how have you seen him play as part of that Toulouse system?
Well, yeah, he's an interesting one because he's part of, as I said, that halves partnership that's almost rotated this season. There's been him, Cesar Rougier and Thomas Lacan as well. It's been those two that have sort of been in and out. So he's not played all of the season, but certainly at the weekend against Huddersfield, he was the dominant half. Now, Rougier played very much off the back of him. They shared a bit of the kicking as well, but everything seemingly that was good about Toulouse's attack started with Shorrocks. He was first receiver on most occasions. He had a real slickness to his passing, and he's organised. He was taking the ball to the line before releasing it. He looked really, really tidy. And I think he's one of several players in that Toulouse outfit that have almost gone under the radar. I think Ashel Bott you can chuck in there as well to a degree. I know we keep talking about him. He's not playing tonight, but they've managed of Toulouse. And I think it's really unique to them. When you look at the 3 sides that have come up in Super League, they made very few signings in the off-season, did Toulouse. They only made a small handful because they've got a very settled side, and I think that's in part to the fact that they are a French-based team. You've not got as much movement in the M62 corridor, over there. They've not got that same amount of movement, so when you compare them to York and Bradford, who came up, York and Bradford made a whole heap of signings to strengthen their squad, whereas Toulouse backed very much what they've got already, backed a lot of their core principles. I think they've recruited. They always seem to recruit well anyway. Hence why whenever they have been in the Championship, certainly in recent history, they've always been one of the top sides. But in that, they've ended up with a lot of players that do just seemingly go under the radar. They clearly enjoy the lifestyle in the south of France. Why wouldn't you? Exactly. Why wouldn't you? But they've ended up with a really settled team, and Shorrocks has been a key part of that down the years. I think when you go over there as well, it probably takes a bit of the pressure off. Obviously under that Wigan microscope, when you're coming through as a young player, there is an expectation. Some live up to it. Some, tend to struggle and have to go and try and find their path elsewhere. And Shorrocks certainly, I think he's been at Toulouse for a good few seasons now, has found his spot over there. He's found somewhere where he feels comfortable, clearly, where the rugby that they play suits his style, and he can very much have an impact on that side. So, yeah, I think he's a really important part, or has become a really important part, a real important cog in that Toulouse wheel. And I wouldn't be surprised to see tonight everything seemingly go through him, or a lot of what Toulouse do go through him.
Neither would I. I think when, again, Ashel Bott being out, I think it's going to put a bit more pressure on him. I really liked how direct he was against Huddersfield. I think at times, yes, he's got a great pass. He's got one of the best kicking games in the league. When you look at sort of the top 10 players, he's ranked quite highly in amount of kicks and kick meters. Got a great 40-20 a few weeks ago as well. But actually, he can be direct. He can carry the ball at the line when needed to. And that's always a threat when you've got a halfback that can do, he's multifaceted and can do a couple of things, isn't it?
Absolutely is. But I think you look on the flip side of this game tonight, he's coming up against Jake Connor and Brodie Croft. Now, on paper, it's an absolute mismatch.
Yeah.
I always think with the two French teams, how much is that travel element and the home soil for them? How much does that play into a game like this? And we'll see very shortly. But yes, I think Toulouse have got something good going when it comes to their halves and their wider team as well. But I think on the other side, the conditions that we're expecting, which I tell you what are a far cry from what we've got at Headingley
It's not
today.
rechucking it down like
well,
it is
exactly,
today.
exactly. I think that very much suits Leeds. I think they are a team that thrive when they are in those dry conditions, when Connor and Croft can properly get their hands on the ball and can throw it about with less risk of it being slippy and it coming out of hands and stuff. So yes, I think Shorrocks will be direct and will probably look to engineer Toulouse's attack in that way, but I think at the same time Leeds are probably more of a threat with the ball going forward and a bit more multifaceted as well.
I totally agree in that. I think when you look at the outside backs for the Rhinos, you look at Brodie Croft when he wants to be direct. When it's dry, that's when they like the ball. When Jake Connor can put a pass and it goes into hands, there's not a wet ball to worry about, which there could be if it was here today, which it's not, thankfully. I think at the same time, Toulouse, yes, looking for their second win over the Rhinos in Super League, but have only won once as well at home this year, which is, I think, a real standout. You talk about sort of those French sides wanting to make those or trips to France a bit of a fortress as such. They've struggled to do that this year. Talk about new signings or a lack of new signings. A couple of mid-season signings have come in for Toulouse this year. John Telefoa being one of those, but Ethan Quay-Ward has looked really great on the outside backs. What a pickup he's been from. I know he played at Canterbury, but played a lot in the New South Wales Cup competitions. He seems to be another starlet that's coming out from there.
Without a doubt, and he's from good stock, as you mentioned there, been part of the Bulldogs system. I think he was part of the Dolphins system and the Broncos system as well over in the NRL. So he's played alongside or trained alongside a lot of established players over there in his career so far. Hasn't quite broken through, has always almost been on the periphery of squads. I think he's been named in a few sort of extended NRL squads, but never managed to sort of break in and get a debut. So, he was one of those players that has very much been on the periphery of the NRL for a while and has taken the punt to come to Europe, to come up to Super League and have a go and see if that'll progress his career. I think at the point that Toulouse are now, when they picked him up, they were in need of a centre. They've had a couple of injuries in those areas this season, a couple of players that have spent a bit of extended time out. And so just needed, I think, to bolster their ranks in the outside backs. And I think he's a really tidy pickup. Watching him against Huddersfield at the weekend, he's big and strong, he's rangy. You can tell that, he's an athlete. He's come through those systems and has spent time in professional environments because I think his body shape very much shows that.
Scored a try in that game as well, by the way.
He did, yes, he did. He's got a good turn of pace as well. I think will be a handful to deal with. He'll probably play on the right side, I'd say.
Will that be with Paul Ulberg?
It will be with Paul Ulberg, yeah, down that right edge for Toulouse. That's where he was at the weekend, certainly. So that'll be a task for Ash Handley and Mike Acevo. I'll tell you what, Ash Handley's had some fantastic battles, hasn't he, this season
It's been tasked with some tough
opponents.
With
opposite numbers, yeah. I mean, you just look at some of the more recent games. I thought Lewis Jagger was a really good sort of matchup for him. The young centre at Huddersfield. That was really interesting. But there's been a few of those already this season that he's come up against. But I think this will be another one for Handley, who is again just he's a player that's constantly just improved, hasn't he, down the years. I know we were talking. It was his appearance 250 for him last week, which. He's very well deserved. He's one heck of a milestone. I remember him coming through the squad, coming into the squad, back in the day. So, he's just progressed so much since as a leader as well, I think, in that Rhinos side. But it'll be interesting to see that battle between him and Quay-Ward, who, as you mentioned, Dan, is I think a very tidy pickup for Toulouse. And
just like a fine wine, I think is the best way to describe Ash Handley. He keeps on going. We can't wait to see how Ash gets on. Hopefully a try, but he's provided plenty of assists for his man outside of him, Mike Acevo. I would argue this guy next is the big standout player for Toulouse this year. I know it's one of those where the work goes maybe missed sometimes, but Brendan Hands, as a pickup from Parramatta, knows Brad Arthur extremely well, having played with him played under him at Parramatta Eels, was given his debut by Brad. Part of that Penrith feeder system, so when you talk about coming from great stock, he's one of those. But he's one of those guys this year that they're really relying on to get the work done in attack and defence. He's been brilliant.
It was great for them in the Championship last season. I think that was a really shrewd signing last season when they got him from Parramatta mid-season, came over to Toulouse and played a big part in their Championship season last year in the end, and has very much continued that form into Super League. I think he was one of those signings that they almost made with one eye on Super League, and knowing that when they moved up, he could be a player that very much helps everyone else step up to the level, because I think he is to a degree NRL quality. Hence why when he was over there for a good chunk of time, he did hold down a spot. Now that was rotating with Joey Lussick. For a fair old while, who a lot of people will know from his time at Salford and St Helens. They were Parramatta's 2 9s for a fair while and would rotate there. But that, as you say, Brad Arthur gave him his debut, which is a nice little sort of subplot going into this game. But he kicked 40-20 at the weekend against Huddersfield in the first half, which at the time really grappled some momentum for Toulouse in that match at a point which they needed. And it was one of the sort of stereotypical 9 40-20s where he just sort of skipped out from the ruck, booted it down the right channel, and it skipped out beautifully. So he's clearly got that in his game as well. But when you talk about his distribution, his running game, he's been one of the more consistent performers, I think, for Toulouse this season. He's managed to stay fit for the most part. I'm not sure if he's ever present. I'd have to double check that. He might be.
He's played 20 games this year, so he's
there we go.
Nearly. It can't be 20, but it's the 8 games played last year plus 12 already. Yes. So he's only missed a handful of games.
Yeah, and I think it shows. They've got some good consistency in that sort of middle region, and he is very much at the forefront of that, and has struck up seemingly a nice combination with the halves and with Ashelbot as well. So yeah, he's a fantastic player.
I do say that, to be fair, he has played the most minutes out of any hooker in Super League this year, so regardless of how many games he's played, minutes-wise. But that's because I don't think there's a second option, really.
Yeah,
Look down their squad, who's coming in to play hooker that's going to be that experienced?
That's the thing as well. I think he played 80 minutes against Huddersfield, and I wouldn't be surprised if he did. I think when you look at the other options they've got, you're looking at a couple of young French lads. Hugo Garrigue, who's in their squad, going into this game, might not be in the 17, but he's in the 21. Baptiste Rodriguez is another one that is an option. He's not in the 21, I don't think. He's more of a loose forward hooker hybrid. So Hans is clearly the number one when it comes to that. I mean, Callum Gahan is another player they've got, but he's out injured for a good chunk of time. So he would be that natural rotation. But injuries have played the part there. So Hans has had to step up and be that 80-minute player at times. Anthony Marion is another option they've got there, but they like him as a loose forward and being that sort of ball-playing loose forward, a bit like Cameron Smith is for the Rhinos. So Hans has very much had to just take that mantle on himself and play at times as the sole hooker in that squad, which means longer minutes, but he clearly has got that longevity because he doesn't seem to fatigue easily, and that has been a big benefit for Toulouse as well.
Funny you say about Baptiste Rodriguez, he is one of the guys who's out with Ashelbot this week, so he's one of 2 changes for Toulouse. That gives us a great chance to look at the Rhinos 21-man squad. That's just dropping up below us. Rinse and repeat for Brad Arthur. He goes the same again, unchanged. It will be the last time we see Fergus McCormack in terms of Lockie Miller's back after his ban. Just a quick note on how you have. I don't think we've touched on this in recent episodes, but how have you seen him be part of? He seems to really fit in really well, doesn't he? And fit into that role that is difficult when you're looking at Miller at the top of the Man of Steel leaderboard. The
signs are there, aren't they? There's some really promising shoots of growth, I think, from McCormack, and it's been really interesting to see him just get these couple of games. It'll be his 3rd in a row tonight before, as you say, Miller's back from suspension against Warrington. But it's been really interesting to see him get this run of games and how he sort of steps up to the challenge. Now it's been 2 very, very contrasting opponents and challenges for him in Huddersfield and St Helens. Huddersfield was a bit of I'm not going to say an easier ride, but it was a much more routine win for Leeds, and one that probably didn't have him under pressure as much. I think Brad Arthur said after that game he probably did a few things that he didn't need to, and that weren't particularly his job or his role, but that was just the sort of exuberance that you get from a young player getting this chance.
Running 10k is
exactly.
Maybe one of those things he would say.
Exactly, but it's not bad on the fitness charts, is it though? But against St Helens, I thought he was really impressive. He took a lot of hits in that game. They threw a lot at him, as you'd expect. If you've got a young fullback on the opposition team, then you do target him.
Absolutely.
And he would have been expecting that. The Rhinos team, Brad Arthur would have been expecting that. But he essentially, stood up to everything that was thrown at him, whether it was high kicks, kicks along the floor. Some of those kick returns were eye-watering at times because of the amount of big players that were running at him and putting him to ground, but he kept getting back up. And I think, almost got his rewards in the end by laying on that assist for Mike Acevo's try, which proved the decisive one in the end. So, that was a really nice moment. I got the chance to speak to him afterwards as well for BBC Radio Leeds and, have a quick catch-up. And bless him, he sat down next to me and he said, how are you feeling after that? And he went, sore. Sore is one word to use. So, but no, he seems to certainly be taking this chance with both hands and enjoying it as well, which I think is the key part. He's clearly enjoying having this little run of games. Probably is very aware of the fact that once Lockie Miller is back, he then drops back down the pecking order, which is just the way that rugby league works at this level. But no, I think he can be really proud of the 2 games he's played so far, and there are some really, really good signs there from Fergie McCormack and for Leeds Rhinos. When you look at the bigger picture, the long-term picture, and the part that he could well have to play in this side for years to come. I think he's been really, really solid.
Definitely put him in that camp with George Brown as stars for the future. Jack Bird as well remains in the lineup, so still a competition whether he could maybe come in this week. Brad seems to have said he's 18th, so I think it'll be go with Harry Newman again. But again, just on that consistency, and we talked about earlier in the year when the Rhinos were churning out unchanged 17-man squads. It makes it difficult for players to break in, but it sets a bar, doesn't it, for just what the level of players need to perform at in order to make that step up and break into a highly competitive team. Look at Ethan O'Neill and Jeremiah Matautia. Obviously, would be like to be in the squad, having to go get their opportunity at Hull FC, but it leaves it makes that competition better, I'd say.
I'd completely agree, and that sort of. And it's become a bit of a watch phrase now in rugby league, but that next man up mentality seems very much the case here at the Rhinos. And I think McCormack's a good example of that. Lockie Miller drops out, you chuck a young kid straight in, and he plays those minutes. And, down the track this season, should injuries occur, they've got an O'Neill and they've got a Matautia that they can call upon should they need them. But, there's plenty of players in that squad that, are just ready to jump in when needed. I think it's a week too early for Tom Holroyd, I think Brad Arthur was saying.
Yes, he
so
did. Yes.
He won't feature tonight by the sounds of things. And the one change comes in that 18th man role with Jack Bird, who was, I think it was Prez de Cassel last week, who was back in the 18th shirt, wasn't he? But I know Bird he had his match shorts on and stuff, and you could see him after the game chatting with fans still. So
he's chomping at the bit to get back to action, isn't he?
I can imagine, but again, when he is fully fit, what do you do then? Because Harry Newman again has looked really impressive these last couple of weeks. Scored that try against St Helens, very much a Harry Newman try.
I would say so.
On the cut-out pass from Brodie Croft, just hitting that line perfectly. And almost creating his own space, giving it big licks afterwards, which I think everyone enjoys when things are going the Rhinos' way. So
his first win over St Helens as well in his career, so I don't quite blame him, to be honest.
Wow, look at that as
apart from Magic Weekend, so his first apart from Magic, his first, whether you look at home and away.
Yeah,
his first league win there.
But what a moment for him, and again he's found a bit of form after finding himself out of the squad for that bit of time. Again going on loan to Hull, but he's the example, isn't he? Steps straight back in and is playing at a high level. So, what do you do when Jack Bird's back fully fit? These are, thankfully we're not making these decisions. These are Brad Arthur's dilemmas to get over. So, but I think they've had the luxury Leeds this season of that consistency, and I think that is in part the reason why they find themselves where they are. I mean, you look at some of the competitors that are in and around them. Wigan have struggled at times with injuries. St Helens have as well. They make changes every single week. Their backline is constantly in and out. Warrington are perhaps feeling the pinch a little bit with some of the players that they've got out. But Leeds have sort of proved the outliers when it comes to injuries. So credit to the backroom staff and the conditioning staff for that. And I know Brad Arthur's spoken a few times about those guys and the work that they do to keep everyone fit and keep everyone ready and keep that consistency as well. So that is very much a team effort. But I think it's really played into Leeds' hands as that element of the game this season. And as we've said, it's looking like rinse and repeat. Same 17 going into this game too.
Let us know what you think the Matchday 17 is going to be. Make sure you comment that, as well as your full-time scores. Want to know just exactly what you're predicting for the Rhinos to get on today. Just a quick note with you mentioned St Helens there. Absolutely did us in with playing all 4 halfbacks last week. After we said which ones we thought would play, they chucked all 4 out there and put Tristan Saylor on the wing. So thank you for that, Paul Rowley. Moving into our head-to-head, and I think looking at players that have had to maybe re-involve themselves and gain opportunities, Chris Hankinson's definitely one of those for Leeds, and Matteo Gisomi has done the same for Toulouse in that, but he's been there a little bit longer. He's sort of moulded into both the back row options. Chris Hankinson, start with him, has gone, maybe can't get in that outside backs core. He's just slotted in at second row and is absolutely on fire. I know the fans absolutely love him for his efforts out there. How have you been impressed by him? What have you seen that maybe has enhanced him as a back rower, and maybe little qualities that have helped him?
He's such an interesting enigma of a player, I think, Hankinson, and I think the big conversation around him naturally before the season was, where on earth does he go? Now, he was obviously signed midway through last season, is a bit of a jack of all trades when it comes to the back line, can play anywhere, played in the halves on Boxing Day, I think, has played spells at full-back when Lockie Miller's been given, that last 10-15 minutes of rest. Plays in the centre, plays on the wing.
He's everywhere.
He genuinely is. He is the Swiss Army knife, isn't he, of this side? And that in itself is a really valuable asset. Obviously signed on that 1-year deal for this season. Got given the 14 shirt, and I think that was telling. I think there are a few hints from Brad Arthur at the start of the season as to what role he would be using. I think the plan was probably to have him on the bench to step in where needed, but in this last couple of months, he has just cemented that back row spot, which again, I don't think is something that anyone expected, especially given how well stocked Leeds are in that area. James McDonnell, Callum Watkins, Ethan O'Neill, Chris Hankinson, you didn't have in that conversation as a back rower at the start of the season. What I think really suits him there is just his physicality and his size. He's always been a very rangy centre. He's had the height, he's had the build. Even when he was playing at championship level with Swinton and he's played at Featherstone.
Toulouse as well, but that's at Super League, so it comes up against his former club today.
He's always had that physicality and that size as a centre, and that probably lends itself well to what the modern day back rower has to be. It's not like back in the day where they were slower players, those players that found themselves not quick enough to be outside backs, but not big enough to be props. That seemed to be the sort of body type however many years ago, but now it's a much different role. It's a much more physical role. You have to be more of an athlete and I think have a better leg speed, and it's a completely different ask now for back rowers in this day and age, and I think he suits it really well. I think there's still elements of that position that he's learning, which is only natural, but I think as a body to have in that left second row position, he's growing week on week in there. He's picking up the runs that he needs to be making. I think from a defensive standpoint, he's just as solid as he's always been for Leeds. And with Ash Handley and Mike Acevo outside him as well, is a nice combination there. So yeah, he's as I say, it was a surprise when he first lined up in that position and he was dropped into that second row spot. I think a lot of people, a lot of Rhinos fans, certainly asked the question of why is he there? Why is he the one that's getting that shout? But he's doing plenty right, and it's no wonder that Brad Arthur's keeping him in that spot when, again, you talk about standards. He's one of those that he's driving it from a position that he's not played for almost his entire career. So fair play to him, moulding himself into that role and seemingly having a really big impact there.
More fools for not trusting Brad Arthur in the first place, I think. But I find it quite funny. We talked back in episode 1 about how this forward pack looked. We never said Chris Hankinson.
No.
The thought never came into our heads. In terms of Toulouse's forward pack, Gisomi has always been in that conversation. When you talk about tall, rangy back rowers, he's one of those that just gets through the work. He's our top try scorer this year with 8. It's not really a surprise that with his ties to Toulouse, having been there for, I think this is his 6th or 7th season now, he's someone who is part of the furniture. He understands how Helens wants to play. I'd say crucially was part of that relegation team in 22, so knows what it means to represent this team on the big stage and make sure that they're winning.
Well, I think he comes into that category as well of one of those underrated players, or one of those that goes under the radar that I mentioned earlier, because he has just been part of that system and hasn't really ever seemingly known any different. He came through there and has just been a constant part of their first team, like a good chunk of other players in that squad. But he's another one similar to Hankinson that started out as a centre, came through as a centre, played a good chunk of his Toulouse career as a centre, and only in the past couple of seasons has moved that one spot inside into the back row. And I think on the back of his performances this season, you can see why, and you can see why he suits that. 'Cause again, he is a powerful player. He's a strong player. He's a big player, actually, when you look at him.
Oh, yeah.
I'd always sort of see him as quite a slimline centre, but no, he's really put some size on and more than matches it with some of his opposite numbers. Again, he's one that is quick too and has that leg speed, can hit lines well. Scored 2 tries at the weekend against Huddersfield.
Doing just that as well.
Exactly, yeah. So that shows the kind of transition that some of these players who do go from centre to second row. We talk about Chris Hankinson. Callum Watkins is obviously another one that started out as a winger centre for Leeds, and throughout his career has transitioned further into the middle. So it's not completely unheard of. No. But these are 2 good recent examples in Hankinson and Jassom of players who have made that move and very much seem to be benefiting from it. But yeah, Jassom has really, I think, caught the eye from a Toulouse point of view. If it's not Ashel Bott that people are talking about in that Toulouse side, it is Mathieu Jassom for that exact reason. 8 tries this season, Toulouse's top try scorer, a real threat on that right edge. So it'll be him and Hankinson actually that do come head to head in the game. They'll be opposite numbers, and that again will be a really intriguing battle, I think. So you've got 2 players there that have made that move from centre to second row and have enhanced both their own game and their team's performance as a result.
I think it'll be interesting just seeing who gets the first try out of those 2, because yes, Jassom can get the tries. Chris Hankinson proving as well he can be direct and he can find.
What about his try against St Helens as well? Some fantastic deception from Jake Connor, but it takes Hankinson to be smart, and like I said, that's partly just learning that second row position and learning the demands of that role. To come back on the inside and offer himself as an option there to Connor. How telegraphed or how much the pair of them knew about that play before the ball was played. The play before. We'll never know.
I'd ask Michalewski the same question for his second try against
Quite, yeah. Well, it might have been instinctive. It really might have been instinctive, just as a move that they both saw, and it came off, and it's a fantastic try in the end, and one that really gets the Rhinos into that game, doesn't it? So, yeah, that's Hankinson learning that role, I think, and an example of him adapting and picking up some of the demands that you need in that position.
Well, Jassom and Toulouse better be watching Jake Connor and the Rhinos, as kickoff is coming very shortly. Team news as well, just around the corner. Well, if you're watching us in Toulouse, hello from back at home in Headingley and in Leeds. We hope you're enjoying the sun out in Toulouse and ready for a great game. What's set to be a great game. Will the Rhinos get their first win in Toulouse in Super League, or will Toulouse make it back-to-back wins? Make sure to get your score predictions in. Comment those now, and we'll keep on record just in case you are right. Well, if you're not out in Toulouse and want to keep in touch with the game, there's only one way to do that, and that is watching the game. That's live on Sky Sports Plus as a bonus stream this week. So the action on is a little bit earlier as well. Kickoff for this one is 6 o'clock. So make sure you don't miss kickoff. It's not the usual 8 o'clock kickoff. We're on at 6. Just because we're on Sky Sports Plus as well, we're not on main broadcast. That means you, Super League Plus customers, can watch us too. Just find us under the Toulouse versus Leeds Rhinos stream. And of course, the only other way, there's no radio coverage as well for this one, so the only best way to stay in touch is from the club. Across Leeds Rhinos, at Leeds Rhinos, across X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. You can catch all the post-match reaction from Brad Arthur and the team, as well as all the little fun that they get up to out there in France. Well, my name's been Dan Hawkhead. A thank you as well to Jack Conlon, as usual, for his analysis and insight. And team news for you is coming next.